The economic battle in the EU continues to rage on, and today we will discuss as Greece prepares for Grexit. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. We're going to get into these issues today, talk about them, break them down. First, I want to get into this news. Putin threatens nuclear war. Russian leader will take any necessary steps to drive NATO out of Baltics and defend Crimea. So this is some pretty interesting information that came out. Now hang on there just for a second because there's more to come on this. Essentially what they claimed was that Russian intelligence chiefs took part in a secret meeting with U.S. officials, outlined 3 potential flashpoints that could lead to an all-out nuclear war. So they essentially said that Russia came out and admitted that they were willing to go to nuclear war if, in fact, they needed to. So this news was, of course, spread all around the world. But if you go to this article of Sputnik, 2 British newspapers claim that Russia had intended to use nuclear force to protect Crimea in March 2014 if NATO had moved additional forces into the Baltic states. So again, that was the claim, but according to this here, that was apparently false. Russia did not threaten the West with nuclear weapons over the protection of the Crimean Peninsula, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Thursday. And he said, of course not. So we don't know what to believe exactly, but I will tell you something. When Putin wants something to happen, he admits it publicly. He's not afraid in order to bring stuff out into the media. He doesn't care what people think. He just goes ahead and does everything. And that's the way it's been seeming like for the past few years, particularly, where anything he wants, he publicly admits it. So if they wanted to use nuclear force or suggested it, I believe he would actually come out and say these words. So this is what we have to see. Whether it's true or not, we know that there is, in fact, a threat of nuclear war at any given moment, particularly what's happening in Ukraine at this time. And it comes from both sides. So let's go to the big news of the day. And we're looking at Greece drawing up DRACHMA plans, preparing to miss the IMF payment. This is huge news right here. The biggest news, in fact, for what's happened with Greece recently. Greece is drawing up drastic plans to nationalize the country's banking system and introduce a parallel currency to pay bills unless the Eurozone takes steps to defuse the simmering crisis and soften its demands. So this is very big news. As I was saying, they're ready to not pay up to the IMF. This is pretty intense. Sources close to the ruling, Syriza Party, said that the government is determined to keep public services running, pay pensions as funds run critically low. It may be forced to take unprecedented step of missing a payment to the IMF next week. And this will be a historic event should this happen. They will not immediately default. Things will not just collapse overnight, but we will definitely see some volatility. And they said essentially that Greece no longer has enough money to pay this $458 million on April 9th. So that's the big day that we all need to watch. Of course, I'll cover it here. And one last quote from here. We are a left-wing government. If we have to choose between a default to the IMF or a default to our own people, it is a no-brainer. Now, this is really good in a way that they're willing to say, get out of here, IMF, but at the same time, the IMF has a very, very big stronghold over this country in particular. I want to move on to this article. Further down, they said, they want to put us through the ritual of humiliation and force us into sequestration. And right here, they are trying to put us into a position where we either have to default to our own people or sign up to a deal that is politically toxic for us. If that's their objective, they will have to do it without us. So they're coming out there, at least on the surface level, saying some very, very serious things here. And right at the bottom, we will shut down the banks and nationalize them, then issue IOUs if we have to. And we all know what this means. What we will not do is become a protectorate of the EU. So Right here, they're suggesting that they will nationalize the banking system. I believe that every country facing a crisis this deep will eventually have to nationalize the banks. Look at what happened in Japan, and we can see that it's truly not beneficial in the long term, but they are pushed against the wall. They don't really have many options at this point because they're so heavily in debt, all because of the crimes of the bankers, the credit default swaps, and all of the other derivatives that were used as weapons against them. So just to really reiterate the problems here that they face. Now, essentially, they have a maximum amount of debt that cannot be paid back. They have the Troika overruling everything that they do, even though they say that they will not. Unfortunately, they do have a very big hold over Greece and their economy. That is something that they cannot avoid at this point. They're going to be in for a world of hurt regardless. But we definitely want them to get rid of that Troika, deal with the pain for a period of time, and then begin again to grow. Let's look at this out of my book, and essentially talking about Ponzi schemes and the government collectively using Social Security and all these sort of methods. It works like any other Ponzi scheme whereby new people paying into the pool of money are funding people receiving those benefits now. As long as the money flows in, the system can theoretically continue. And that's what's happening with Greece right here. They're sort of being bailed out on the side by other nations buying up their debt, and it is not enough that they need, unfortunately, but essentially they're doing so, being bought up that debt, and only so that they can then take that money and either send it to the IMF or send it to the people's pensions, whatever, just to get them all paid. But we can see specifically that this is a failing, really a failure in the long term, because the money will not keep up with the amount of debt that has accumulated. It's not just Greece that's facing this, it is many different countries. You can see it particularly with Portugal, Spain, Italy, other countries in the EU, and of course the US, the UK. Everyone's really dealing with this right now. I'll move on to this. Greek defiance mounts as the Alexis Tsipras turns to Russia and China. This is an escalating game of brinkmanship, trying to force Europe to give ground or risk the chain reaction that could cripple the EU. So here he is at the bottom there, and essentially, if you go down further in this article, they talk about how China stepped in at the last minute and bought up some of their debt right here. So this is something that happens always at the last minute, just saving the day. Not just China and Russia, but we see this with the Federal Reserve coming in to buy up the debt of the US government and other nations as well. We see all the central banks stepping in, buying it up, but we also see other nations from around the world trying to take advantage of this and in another way lend a helping hand. And we could see how China and Russia are trying to find alliances around the world. There are many different countries, I've covered it here before, but we can see these different alliances forming. And although Greece has said that they do not want to leave the Eurozone, we do see them partnering up with Russia and China to some degree. Let's look at this. Greece will go bankrupt within a week, government officials have told their creditors, as the country's bailout negotiations push the cash-starved government to the wire. This is huge news, but if you look at this, a Greek government representative is reported to have told the Eurozone officials at the teleconference Wednesday there is no way we can go beyond April 9th. And that's regarding the IMF deadline that I talked about. The claims were later categorically denied by the finance ministry. I don't believe that they have enough money to do this unless somebody comes in and really pays off or buys up some of their debt, which will then get them through this one payment. But ultimately, they have so much more future debt to worry about. This amount of money, the 458 million, is really small compared to the actual amount of money that they owe in the coming months and years. So they're in big trouble. They have to sell a lot of their debt very quickly. I want to move on to this. I'm just trying to get through this as quick as possible. I know you guys are already aware of a lot of this. This article here is out of Bloomberg, and this is what it all comes down to. We're talking about the US in this case, but of course this goes throughout the whole world. And while all of this crisis is going on in the Eurozone, in Greece, we are seeing people really starving. Their unemployment rate is 25+%. We look at the youth unemployment rate, 40+%. People are in trouble and they are starving. But look at this. Americans earning less than they did in 2013, with one notable exception, the rich. And they're saying that the rich is apparently $166,000. That's not the rich that I'm talking about. We're looking at the so-called 1%. And then the further up you go, in fact, the more money they've been making. The lower you go, like look at this, the lowest quintile, which earned only $10,000, lost the most ground. So the poor becoming poorer, the rich becoming richer. It is such a cliche, and it is undoubtedly true right now. The way they've set up this system is that the bankers have control, the politicians subdue you, and they are basically there to keep everything quiet and calm while they allow the elite of this world to profit. And that's what's happening. The banks are always saying, look, you need to bail us out because we need to protect your money. But how do they do so? They take the money from you and they put it into their, not into your bank account, but they put it into their own. They gamble it away, and every so many years they have to be bailed out again. A few years ago, the financial crisis wasn't the first time banks have been bailed out in the US. People seem to forget that, but if you just look back in history, it's happened countless times over and over again, always robbing the people of their money. And who has to pay that? It's not the richest of the rich, the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates. They get off scot-free on everything. You have to realize that this is always the lowest of the low, and the middle class, the lower class, they are unfortunately having to foot the bill. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. I have so much more information to cover. I really appreciate all the comments on the video that I did previously. I'm trying to do as much as I can for the e-course, but I know that many people on here are already aware of that information. So I'm trying to just sprinkle it in and not really do too much of that, because I have great respect for the subscribers on here. Always ready and willing to hear what you guys have to say, any suggestions, any comments. I'm getting emails consistently. My inbox is always full, and I really appreciate that. I get to you as quick as I possibly can. And last but not least, don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. You just scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.